Hey Jan, and welcome to episode 3. Very excited about today. How are you doing?
As always, delighted to be here. I had a epiphany of a moment yesterday, getting to learn ChatGPT at a whole new level, and I feel I was able to do 10 days of work in one day. I mean, it was just amazing, Hannah. I really felt, we always experiencing so many magical technologies in Industry 4.0, right? And everything is a new thing, right? But
Yeah.
um, I try to hold myself back on the hyperbole now, but I really just think this is just absolutely, for me, in my little unique experience, something like I've never experienced in my entire life. Breathtaking. I literally had moments where I just stopped and my jaw dropped and my heart rate accelerated. And I was like, I cannot believe that this is
Did you get a new
happening.
girlfriend? Your heart accelerating, your pupils dilating.
This is even more interesting than a girlfriend, right? I think.
Interesting. So what
Yeah. So
what do you think was most interesting about that? Um, your familiarity with ChatGPT. What stood out the most to you?
yeah, two things. One was, I mean, as you know, I'm a geek, so I love going into texts and digging into them, and um, but the challenge becomes surfacing that knowledge again. So when I've read a book, how can I remember exactly what was in chapter 3 or 4, and how would I cross-reference that with another book? So I was playing on the weekend with ChatGPT, talking about different leadership styles, approaches, referencing different books and authors, and it was just amazing how it was able to just pull up different texts and different information around that, right? And so it was able to say, compare and contrast generative, servant, transactional, transformational, complexity, leadership. Okay, now organize that into a table with strengths and weaknesses, give examples of each one. Now, what's interesting in that is that, there is opportunities for a little bit of bullshit well, or sometimes a lot, right? Chat GPT often will just write what it thinks it should write without, being able to be aware of that.
Yeah,
But in
yeah.
terms of just being able to do research and analysis and crunch huge amounts of contextual data quickly, it's like nothing I've experienced in my life. Unreal, unreal. And then the ability to add a command, write text in different tones of voice, right? So, we're working on the desert of despair. So, right, okay, so this is how this is how you build an MVP, right? Okay, now change the text that I've written and rewrite it in the tone of the wind of the desert in a sandstorm, and you're a warrior fighting your way through the desert of despair. Now tell the story of how to build an MVP in that language, and it will do it. And then I'll say, okay, it's a bit negative, add more bright, inspirational tone of voice. Boom, and it's rewritten. So the ability to instantly work with large chunks of text and therefore meaning and quickly and radically re-alter them at a command changes everything, because before the constraint was the input rate, right? If I wanted to rewrite the text, I literally have to sit down and rewrite 1,000 words, and that takes an hour at least, right? Maybe two. Whereas now it's done in less than a minute. And
Wow.
then it becomes more about being aware of what is it that I'm looking for, what's the right way to get there, and sending out commands to ChatGPT and shaping the design space with the intention of what am I trying to create here, right? And that's also doubly interesting because I'm only getting to learn ChatGPT, and I think we're also only just starting to get to understand what it can do itself, right? So
Yeah.
it's this whole new world of I try. So the first time I tried, this is a bit depressing. I think it just needs to. So I use a lot of literalism with ChatGPT. I'm like, literally just make it more inspiring and brighter, right? It's not clever words, right? Those are like 10 words, right? Make it more inspiring and brighter in tone of voice. And then bang, it's suddenly the text that was okay has now been written in something that's really interesting, right? And that ability to just keep exploring it is just remarkable. And then we were also touching on the idea that it gets to know things, right? So over long it will weave things in that I haven't mentioned in my previous command or previous commands, but maybe 10 commands later, previously I was mentioning something about the Tower of Possibility. And then it'll be like,
Yeah, it
oh yeah, by the
self-learns.
way, you definitely want to make sure you're heading towards the Tower of Possibility. I'm like, where on earth did it pull that?
Yeah.
What? Right? So I think that kind of is such a powerful, it's just an extraordinary tool. Extraordinary. And of course, final point there, just as a chucking in, I was chatting to my friend who works with the European Union to around innovation. He's telling me that GPT-4 will go from billions of nodes to trillions of nodes, and that's a very large leap. So from $1 billion, a lot of money, to $1 trillion, that's like that's a very large kind of money.
What are nodes? What do you mean by nodes?
So it's sort of at the risk on Women's Day of mansplaining something to you here, Hannah, my full conscientiousness, but I will do my best.
Mansplaining. I see it as I don't have access to ChatGPT right now to ask what are nodes, so I'm going to ask Jan Superbrain. So
okay. So the network basically, I imagine it has lots of circles, and each circle has a certain processing capability, and then you plug those circles together with cables, and they're moving information around this neural architecture, right? So you imagine like a brain cell, the brain cell and the brain neuron, right? There's a processing bit and there's a connection bit. So in a similar sense, ChatGPT has something like that. It has nodes, and which are its processing centers, and then it has the ability to connect those all together. Because that's what's interesting about it. ChatGPT is working within its own brain space of what it already knows. It's not live searching the internet, right? I'm not sure if are you familiar with that idea? Like,
yeah, I'm getting what you're saying.
When they made ChatGPT, they kind of they downloaded the entire internet, and then that became its brain.
Yeah.
So it's not like when you're saying, oh, how do I cook a perfect steak, for example, right? It's not going to Google search that quickly in the background, find a website and read the website and tell you what it is. It's not doing that. It has within its library knowledge of what a steak is, what cooking means, what you mean when you're asking for what does a perfect steak mean, right? Because perfect could mean different things for different people, right? And it's using the semantics, so the meaning of the word structures, guide it in terms of being able to generate a response. And this is why it's such a breakthrough. It's not clever Google search. It's fundamentally something different. And that, I think, is and what then, in a way constrains it, it's something like this. It's a useful analogy, is that if you have a computer with 1 billion processors, that's pretty good. If you have a computer with 1 trillion processors, it's just going to be just that much better. Not just like a little bit better, but like so much better, right? So that increase is just such a huge thing, and to the idea that every human on earth will in principle have access to that kind of creative capability. I mean, it's just staggering. It's truly staggering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that I can get that for free, or I mean, I upgraded to premium, $20 for a month. Sign me up. Let's go.
But I use it a lot. I mean, I'm not that in depth yet, as you said. We still have sort of big learning curve to get through, but I do use it in all my communications nowadays. And Hashim was telling me that it's very biased, and I'm like, I don't see it yet. And he's like, oh, you won't see it. You're just very used to it, and that biasness sort of thing will just be in your communication. I mean, that didn't really get me worried, because I'm like, I'm going to read it. Maybe it's making me biased or not, but I'm not really worried about it right now. And then he was saying that Elon Musk is going to create his own AI, ChatGPT. So what are your thoughts on that? Are you worried about being biased, or are you worried about it changing certain narratives for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is this is a conversation I'm very familiar with from philosophy and also from complexity science as well. When you're talking about Gestalt and realizing about different worldviews, I think the short answer to approaching this in useful ways to realize bias is natural. There is no such thing as non-bias. And one of the great transitions that's happening in the background of Industry 4.0 is the transition from an objective worldview to a subjective worldview. So most people at some level will still believe that there is an objective reality out there, a truth. And that can be described in a sense through Newtonian mechanics. But our two leading scientific theories of the day, quantum mechanics and relativity, do not agree with this. There is no objective truth. There is no correct truth. There is just the subjective interpretation of it, or the relativistic interpretation of it. And indeed, in quantum theory, it doesn't exist until you observe it. And when you observe it, you subjectively create it. And so that's not woo-woo magic. That's the foundation of all modern technology that we have in Industry 4.0, is that principle. And so that's why I think it's important to recognize bias is natural and necessary, because it emerges from an individual, from the point of view that someone is observing the world. So I think what's much more effective is to be good at managing bias and being able to discuss when you're being biased, and being open to getting feedback around that. You're never going to eliminate bias, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's just about making sure that you have it in a manageable range so that you can ensure that you can then get on with doing other things that are more useful, right? Yeah, I think that's a nice way to think about it. It's like racism. You're never going to get rid of racism, and racism is a part of humanity, and you know, we are different in those manners, and I think that's important to recognize. And I think to one of the things I've observed, particularly when I grew up in the West, was that our commitment to trying to be humanistic and seeing every human and denying racism often meant that we didn't see that person's individual culture, didn't recognize that they were individuals for coming from a different a background, right? And so it's not just about whether your skin is a different color, it's just that there are differences and that we should acknowledge them, and we shouldn't try and remove all biases, because at some point those biases also make us who we are. So I don't think we should get rid of it. I think we just need to be smart enough to pay attention to keeping it in a useful range, right? That's I think such a key element in that, because otherwise you just get lost in these endless arguments that don't go anywhere. And then we're talking about, well, Musk is an original OG investor in ChatGPT, right? OpenAI. So he's the richest man on earth. There's a nice phrase that the future already exists. It's just not evenly distributed. So I am very confident that Elon Musk is working with probably what might be GPT-5. And he will have access to things that are so advanced that we can't even imagine it. And you know, that's also one of the things that's going to be the difference, right? That sort of AI divide, in a similar way that you have the digital divide, right? People who are digitally empowered and people who don't have smartphones and don't use them, there's a big difference there. The AI divide will be probably even greater, right? Because you can get if your AI is always smarter than everyone else's, you're always in a way be ahead. Now, what's wonderful about the universe is that there's a nice sense of balance to it. So stupidity, greed, incompetence, and bad luck will always play their role in bringing balance back to the universe, shall we say? So I don't think, you know, that is sort of something that's inevitable. But that being said, you know, people will be able to access superpowers and super intelligence. They already can with ChatGPT 3. They already can, right? So one of the things that I tried exploring was write this scene of you know, testing your MVP in the tone of an angel in the desert talking to a warrior to give them divine inspiration. And it came out like a Bible chapter, right? You know, and I was like, wow, we could, you know, that ability to suddenly access these tones of voice and languages is really, that's really cool. That's really cool. And then, you know, you can use then deep fake videos, right? So you could write the text, put deep fake videos, so you can suddenly create entirely different realities. And so that's what we're going to be doing. That's what, well, we're already doing that. We're just going to accelerate it. It's just coming back down to that idea of remaining grounded and human and connected with each other, that we don't get, well, we will get a bit too carried away with it, and then we'll have to correct our course from it.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, let me get on to my first question. Actually, the only question I have for today is well, on the occasion of International Women's Day.
Yes.
I know that innovation is not subjected to gender, but yesterday when we were having this little back and forth on who run the world, girls, and then I sort of Googled whether women are better leaders, and then there were some research and articles that I went through, and there are clear evidences that there are no not much similarity, so you can't say one is better than the other, whatnot. But then we are seeing that in our own program that our female category, the army leaders, are doing much better than the rest of the armies. And also Jacinda's step down as the Prime Minister of New Zealand was sort of felt worldwide, right? What are your thoughts on innovation and gender?
Yeah, this is such a rich conversation. And I'm going to sidestep all of it by saying, I just don't believe that your biological bits and bobs determine your innovation capability. I just don't think that's a useful way of evaluating it. So I think the conversation is already structured in the wrong manner. And I don't mean that to be difficult. I just think we're setting ourselves up for a conversation that doesn't make sense. So I think all people can innovate, in the sense that all people can build their better worlds. And there's much more important things that drive that. For example, how much they care, rather than their particular biological or identity orientation. So I think it's easy to get caught in that sort of, emotional red herring of, oh, gender, and there must be this, and women must be better, no men. No, man, like there's good women leaders, there's good bad men leaders, there's good bits and bad bits, and actually in the end what it comes down to is the individual themselves. It's just too vague to say that there's one thing or the other in that. Now, it is interesting to note in human history that patriarchies do tend to emerge consistently across society, time and space. It'd be interesting to explore why that happens. I think that also there's different elements to play. Maybe there's different preferences in different areas in which they want to lead and not lead, right? Like a traditional household, the man would lead maybe in the workspace and the woman would lead at home, something simple like that. If everyone's cool with that, then that's one possible thing to do. So sort of role separation can be important there. But that's what I really want to say on the sort of the traditional gender subject. What I think is much more interesting is to abstract gender into information theory and look instead at the role that, what does masculine and feminine mean from an information point of view? And I think where I'm at with my thinking on this is basically the feminine represents the ability to receive data and the masculine represents the ability to transmit data, right? So you could say that's symbolized by the penis and the vagina, right? Those sort of symbols, right? And I say that because those are eternal symbols of humanity, right? These are symbols that we've represented for a very long time, right? And it's not just about sexuality, it's about that element of connection itself, the foundational connection. And so to be masculine is to assert information onto the world, and to be feminine is to first receive it, right? So we need both. There must be a transmitter and there must be a receiver for there to be connection, for there to be communication, for there to be dialogue. And so I find this is a much healthier way of, and much more useful way of the conversation of masculine and feminine phenomena, rather than trying to ground it in gender objects or individuals, right? So basically, if I see a human and they are being very assertive, then they are transmitting data into the world. They're being very masculine. Now, they could be traditional women. They could be whatever concepts we apply. But if we just abstract it, they are asserting information. And, to assert effectively, you need to have people or peoples who will receive effectively. So they need to be feminine receivers in that sense, right? And what then becomes interesting in the complex social space is the ability to create, in traditional environments, there'll be one male receiver asserting information and female receivers receiving, and then the reality orientates itself in that way, right? Typically with a dominant masculine and a submissive feminine. And that's a very simple, effective, useful way of organizing reality, right? Regardless of what you think, it works and has been proven to work time and time and again. But as we now go into different, much more high variety environments that are changing much more quickly, we need to have a much more sophisticated ability. So I don't think a leader who only has masculine properties, who can just assert onto the world, is going to be so successful anymore. Sometimes you just need to shut the fuck up and listen, and you need to really listen, and you need to really get it, and you need to stop that transmitting urge and go the other way and urge into receiving, basically, and be really good at listening, because you need to get it. Because if you don't get it, you're not going to make the right decisions and you're going to fail. And if you fail, the business or the country or the company fails, right? So I think it's about cultivating a conversation around transmitting and receiving information and creating the right kind of patterns and rhythms around that. And that's where things like ritual inside organizations become important, roles, values. But ultimately, what I think we're looking for there, in the simple sense, is a much more effective ability to transmit and receive, and not to get stuck in one mode. Right. And as much as men need to listen more, it's said that women, want to lean in more. That's true. But it doesn't mean that you then only lean in all the time. And it doesn't mean that you only listen all the time. It's really about being yourself as an individual and finding the right way of transmitting and receiving information in the way that's right for you in that moment of time. Right. So that I think is a much more useful way to look at the masculine and feminine phenomena in leadership.
So well put, Jan. I was a bit shocked that you went with this angle, but thank you so much for enlightening me on that. And as we approach our time, I would like to thank you for being here, and a reminder to our audience to believe in yourself, be brave, be bold, be brilliant, and build your better world. And Jan, I wish you all the best with ChatGPT. I think both of you are going to have a great time together, and I cannot wait to see what's going to come out in a few months' time.
It's the start of a beautiful relationship, Hannah.
All right, Jan. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Leadapreneurs YouTube channel to get your weekly updates.